I think we're live, Brad.
We are live. Hey, Max, how are you?
I'm good, Brad. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. Good to have all of our guests with us again today. This is Brad Etlin, your host. This is Chicagoans at Home Talkin' Shop. And this afternoon, I have my good friend and colleague, Max Barrick. Max is a plaintiff's attorney at Garfinkel Group. How are you doing today, Max?
I'm good. Excited to see another human face today.
I
Hanging
know,
in there.
right?
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome, good stuff. So before we kick things off, I always like to start off with a couple get to know you questions, Max. So let's start off with a favorite restaurant. What's your go-to?
Uh, it's funny. So I'll give you my favorite pizza place, which is Jimmy's in our neck of the woods in Andersonville. It's a cool community place. They've got gigantic New York style slices. My answer would have been this awesome hole in the wall Thai restaurant that closed as soon as I moved this far north. Used to be
Oh,
on Devon. It was called Thai Spice. There was no sign outside. You could barely find it. But having been to Thailand, I can say it's probably the best Thai food I ever ate. It just disappeared on me one day. So,
oh man, bummer, bummer. Okay, so know your favorite restaurant, and I had never heard of it. Do you know like what the cross section is?
Jimmy's.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy's is on Lincoln and I think Foster. So it's a nice neighborhood joint. I don't know how long it's been there, but I think it's been there a while, and it's good. It's a good big. You can get a slice there, or you can get a whole pizza, and it's awesome.
Okay, nice. I always love new good pizza places to go to, so
Yeah.
that's what I'll do this weekend. All right. What is your either your favorite vacation spot or what is the craziest vacation you've been on?
I'll give you both. My wife and I, for our honeymoon, were lucky enough to go to Greece, and in doing that, we went to one of these islands called Santorini,
Yeah.
and there's this. I think it was 11 kilometers, and I don't know how that converts to miles, but it's like on the side of a cliff. It's a hike. You do it over 3 towns over the course of the island, and she'd been looking forward to it for months. It was well over 100 degrees on the day we did it, and we did not get up there quick enough in the day before the sun got high in the sky, and there's
Mm,
no shade and it's black rock. It was probably the most beautiful view I've ever seen in my life of the deep blue water and what have you. I think it was
yeah.
also the closest we've ever come to dying on a vacation due to heat and sun exposure. So we got done with it and we're like, wow, that was awesome. We really should have planned that better.
That was awesome. Let's never do that again, right?
Yeah, or if we do, start at like 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes out.
For sure. That reminds me of a place called Haleakala in Maui. You ever
Oh
been there?
wow. No, but that sounds, I mean, Hawaii sounds beautiful there.
Yeah.
Is it the
Yeah.
same thing?
Very similar. You go through this thing called Road to Hana, which just crazy kind of like tropical type rainforest to get to this place where you do this incredible trek. Sounds very similar.
Cool. I'll have to add it to my list.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Max. So again, this is Brad Etlin. I'm with Kale Realty, commercial and residential realtor. This is Chicagoans at Home Talkin' Shop. And again, my guest today is Max Barrett with Garfinkel Group. Sorry, Max. And
Okay.
he is a plaintiff's attorney, a plaintiff's employment attorney. And Max, can you tell our audience what that means? What do you do?
Sure. So the general way of understanding it is I represent people who think they have been or may have been wronged in some way in the workplace. Now I represent individuals, so workers, and not typically businesses, though from time to time I will represent businesses and kind of managing their workplace or helping them through different types of disputes.
Okay.
Um, the types of problems that I help people with are pretty varied because when you think about work, you know, there are any number of different types of businesses you can be in, any number of problems that can arise. So generally the stuff that I help people with is any kind of discrimination. So thinking sexual harassment, like Me Too type harassment, quid pro quo sex harassment, I'll give you a job if you do this for me. Um, just generalized discrimination of any kind. You're being treated differently because of your race, because of your skin color, your sex, your sexual orientation, what have you. And then people who are retaliated against when they complain about those things. I
Okay.
also help people who've been who've suffered some sort of wage theft or pay pay claims. So like unpaid overtime wages, maybe you're being asked to work more than 40 hours in a week, but you're not being paid time and a half properly, and you're in a job that entitles you to it. Maybe you're in sales and your employer has done something to stiff you on your commissions or change the terms retroactively so they can find a way to weasel out of paying you.
Right.
People who have left their job but were still owed money and need to reclaim it. I'm also helping people with various types of whistleblower claims. So people who have refused to do something they think is illegal or reported something illegal, whether internally or to the government, and been fired for it.
Okay.
And we've recently started getting involved in what's called BIPA, or Biometric Information Privacy Act claims. So those are when you work somewhere, maybe you clock in, and maybe you use a thumbprint scanner or an eye scanner or some sort of biological information about you, biometric information. The company has to have policies that they give you in advance and that you sign off on for what they're doing with that information, how it's stored, what their safety procedures are, essentially so that your information, your private genetic information, is not just floating around. And if they don't, what typically happens is a lawyer will bring a class action lawsuit. So on behalf of everybody in that workplace who's been aggrieved that way. So we've started working on those sorts of cases as well.
That's pretty interesting. You hear about this type of thing. I mean, granted in a different context with policing, the police using, types of new technology.
DNA, storing DNA for different things, kind of having databases of information. It sounds a lot like Minority Report sometimes, like there's just some big supercomputer with everyone's information.
Exactly.
Candidly, there's not really just some supercomputer like that. But, the idea is we want to make sure that if people are collecting our private data, they're doing it safely and they're not being reckless with it.
And they're not selling it to other parties and that kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So first of all, just can you clarify? So you actually can represent contractors too. You don't have to be an employee per se to seek representation from you. Is that correct?
It is. That's a pretty hot area where we see a lot of stuff like that. I have one right now, a case where I represent I have a couple like that actually, where I have people who were hired for an odd, a one-off job, or in this case, they're independent truck drivers who were contracted by a private over-the-road trucking company to do jobs for them, and then they just flat out stiffed them on the pay. And I have another one where guys were hired to go work private security out of state during a hurricane a couple years ago, and the guy just never paid them for it. So they weren't, W-2 employees who clock in, clock out, and work 9 to 5, but they were hired on a one-off basis and weren't paid. And then you'll also see that sometimes where companies don't want to hire W-2 employees because you're paying payroll taxes, and maybe then you have health insurance, or there's added costs to somebody being full-time. But then they're also not paying them overtime, even though they're working them more than 40 hours in a week. Right. So not all the time, but under some circumstances, that person may be entitled to additional money. Just because you say, well, you're a 1099 doesn't make you an independent contractor under certain laws.
Okay. Really interesting. So Max, in our crazy world we live in of COVID, I hear all the time people are concerned, their employer wants them to come back. They don't feel that their employer's taking the necessary precautions to make it safe for them to return to work. What types of protections do employees have in those kind of gray situations?
It's a good question, Brad. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that. So there are a few different things that are in place. One is one of the first laws that Congress passed during this epidemic, the Family's First Coronavirus Response Act, FFCRA, provided paid sick leave for certain individuals who qualified. So maybe you were high risk, maybe your family member was sick or high risk, or you had a child who couldn't go to school anymore and you had no childcare. It provided a certain amount of paid sick leave for you to be out of the office. Okay. Or whatever your work site is. There are also protections. So OSHA, the federal government agency that investigates workplace safety issues, if you feel that something is unsafe in the workplace, you can always go report that stuff to OSHA. And if you want your employer to know that you're doing it so that they can't then retaliate against you, you can tell them I'm doing that. Now, that may then lead to them firing you, and you have a whistleblower claim set up. You can also do it anonymously if you're afraid that they might take repercussions against you. And if you're just generally concerned about safety and there are unsafe conditions and you feel you've been punished for speaking out about it, you can also go to the National Labor Relations Board. It's a federal organization that was created in the 40s during the New Deal period for regulating working conditions, and they can respond to complaints that you've been punished for speaking out about safety issues. There are other things that exist, but those are just a few examples of what's out there and exists in the world.
And Max, have there been any like recent employment law changes since COVID to basically define in more detail these types of issues?
There have. So one good one. So for those of us in the Chicago area, I don't know how wide your bandwidth is on these, how widespread we are, but I'll just stay local and say in Chicago, I can't recall exactly if it was last month or they passed it the month before and it only took effect, but recently in July, the Chicago anti-retaliation ordinance related to COVID took effect, which said in so many words, if you have a lawful stay-at-home order, and it can come from any number of sources, from a doctor, from a government agency saying you can't go into this type of business, or this setting is closed to the public, or you have a certain type of health condition, some sort of a lawful order. And the statute lays out the different examples saying in so many words, you cannot be in a public workplace doing what you used to do. It's not safe. They can't retaliate against you. So they can't punish you. They can't fire you. They can't harass you in some way. They can't go after you because you're refusing to go back into work because somebody told you, one of the covered people who told you you can't be in public doing that anymore.
Because of like a pre-existing health condition?
Sure, that would be one example. There are a few different examples that exist that are out there for it. Like, let's say the mayor of Chicago says, we're instituting a stay-at-home order across the board, and your employer says, I don't care what Mayor Lightfoot says, you're coming in. They can't punish you if you say, no, I'm not doing that. The mayor or the governor told me not to.
Okay,
Same thing. You're at home because you're sick with COVID, or you think you have symptoms, or your healthcare provider just says, you know what, you're high risk. You can't go in. They can't take action to punish you because you're following instructions there.
Okay, but then also getting back to my earlier question, what if employer says, we've made the workplace safe, you're not feeling it, you don't have trust in that statement, in that assurance, what do? You got to go back, right?
So there are some limitations, yes and no. I remember I had a client years ago who asked me what she thought was a straightforward question, and I gave her a pretty standard 2-minute response because I sometimes use too many words or
Right.
often. And she goes, yeah, Mom, whenever you ask a lawyer a question, because her mom was with us, they'll never give you a straight answer. It's like, well, no, it's not that. It's just sometimes it's not as simple as is the sky blue or not. So if it's just a generalized fear of COVID, you don't have an existing condition that would put you in danger, you're not especially high risk, the workplace is as safe as anything can be right now. Everybody's distant, everybody's wearing masks, no congregating, all of that stuff, and you just don't want to do it, you may have a problem. You can't just have a generalized fear of COVID and say, I'm just never going to come in and expect them to hold your job, continue to pay you, what have you. If they're not being safe, or you do have something that makes you at risk, let's say you have a condition that makes you susceptible to this, you're high risk, you've got like a lung condition or a heart condition,
Mm-hmm.
And you can do your job from home, you could always ask for a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the employer at least has to try to work with you. It's called the interactive process. They at least have to try to meet your obligations if it's reasonable and you can still do the job. So if it's just a general fear of COVID, I just don't want to do this, you're probably going to have a problem. If it's not, and you have something concrete you can grab onto that says, this is why this is bad for me, you may have some options. Does that answer your question?
It totally does. And this conversation, Max, is extremely timely. I'm sure you heard this morning, Lightfoot announced CPS is going to be all remote learning for the time being. So what about parents that are now, at home because they have to be to help their kids do Zoom classrooms and, their education remotely? Does that fall under one of those government orders that would protect an employee who can't go back to work, but can still perform from home?
So in part, the FFCRA, the Families First Act that I described a few minutes ago with the
Okay.
paid sick leave, it would cover that situation. You know, the one problem you're going to have is it's not forever paid sick leave. There's a limit to the amount of time. I think it's 2 weeks. I can't recall exactly. So if you have paid days off saved up, or you can do the job remotely and work from home while your kid is, you know, essentially stuck quarantining at home with you and learning e-learning,
Right.
that'll help you. If you don't, you probably are going to run into trouble at some point if you don't have something else. Now, there are other laws that exist that you might qualify for. Employment law is very fact specific, so every situation can be very unique. You're going to have some protection. It's probably not going to save you forever, but you may have some temporary protections there. And you may have some like family leave you might be able to get under the FMLA if your employer is covered. So if they have more than 50 employees, the Family Medical Leave Act, you know, if you get 12 weeks off, like to have a child, what have you. Sometimes if you have family related issues, that can qualify, but it's complicated and it's going to be situation specific.
And is the question or the determination of whether an employee can perform that same job function from home, does that lie in the hands of the employer?
I mean, it does and it doesn't. I mean, it lies in the hands of the employer until you end up in court, whether, you know, if the breakdown happens and they fail,
Right.
and you end up having to take legal action at some point, that's going to be a question for the court. Could you do the job? You know, if the job is hot dog vendor, which I realize is not a thing right now, but let's say that because I can't think of something better, you can't really perform that job. You know, you can't remotely serve hot dogs. If the job is to serve hot dogs, you got to be in there serving hot dogs.
Right.
So, you know, a better example is maybe teacher. Like maybe you can teach your classroom, maybe you can do e-learning. You're just going to have certain modifications in place.
Okay. Well, this is
Yeah.
so much really important and timely information, Max. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. And I think I have some questions for you too, don't we?
Yeah, let me just ask before we flip over, where can folks find you? Do you have a website? How do you want people to reach out to you if they have questions or need some help?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So you can always call us 312-736-7991. If I talk too fast or you just want to find the website first, garfinkelgroup.com, GarfinkelGroup.com. So our phone number's there, our contact information is up there. You can find us. Our website gives you some information about the various types of legal protections we can help with. And we're happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. And how does it work? Do you give people a free consultation, or how do you work?
So typically we will. The vast majority of our work is done what's called on contingency, meaning you ever see those kind of crummy late night or daytime TV ads for personal injury lawyers? If you've been hurt, you know, we don't get paid unless you do. It's like that, but without the tacky TV ad. Yeah. Sometimes we'll charge a fee, like if you got let go and you've got a severance agreement and you want someone to negotiate it or look at it. Depending on the case, we may do that on an hourly rate. But generally speaking, we're always happy to talk to somebody and give them a little time just to see if we can help them.
Good stuff. Thanks, Max.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask you a couple questions too, Brad.
Great.
So, you know, with everything going on right now, I think, you know, normally summers are usually the hottest time for someone like yourself, for realtors to be earning, right?
Yep.
But this is not obviously a regular time. We're in the middle of a COVID pandemic and an economic, downturn. So what is Chicago's residential home buying market looking like right now, given everything that's happening?
So it's bizarre, but the truth is the market is smoking hot. And there's, you would think with 32%, unemployment and all these crazy, scary statistics that the opposite would be true. But the reality is primarily interest rates are so low that folks who have maybe been sitting on the sidelines renting for a few years, young families in particular who have been renting interest rates, 30-year mortgages around 2.75%, which is just insanely low. So people that have been spending, lots of money on rents, which have been, by the way, rising steadily for like a decade now here in Chicago,
Sure.
are really looking closer at the numbers and seeing that they can actually save 2, 3, $500 a month by owning, and that's just right off the top. And then you have a potential tax benefit, and then you're actually paying down a mortgage. So it's bizarre, but the market is really, really hot. Most of my clients are dealing with bidding war situations right now. Single family homes in kind of the $300,000 to $400,000 price range are all going over asking price. I mean, sometimes 15% over
Oh, wow.
asking price. So bizarre, but very, very strong seller's market.
I was going to say, I mean, that was going to be my question. It sounds like it's a better time to be a seller than a buyer right now. Although I guess those things kind of go hand in hand.
Yes and no. It's a great time to sell, but at the same time, if you're a buyer, even if you're paying a few percent more than you would have otherwise, you're locking in a 2.75%-ish 30-year mortgage. In the long run, you're going to be way better off than, even if interest rates were 4%. It's such a huge difference of savings that, as long as you're not planning on moving within maybe the next year or so, you're going to be laughing in the long term.
It's interesting. It's kind of crazy given that, you have such a hot market, even with the economy. So I guess it's good. At least one thing is still working.
Right. That's right. Yeah, for sure.
So I guess that brings me to the next one, which is given how hot things are right now and how quickly things are selling, from a buyer perspective. So looking at it from the other side, what are some tips buyers ought to understand or know going in, knowing that it's going to be, you have a competitive seller's market right now?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Max. So a few things. First of all, in kind of moderately warm markets, you can usually get away without a pre-approval letter. Today, without a pre-approval letter, you're dead out of the water. Sellers aren't even going to look at your offer. You could be way over asking price. They're not even going to look at you. So pre-approval now is absolutely essential, because many situations you have 3, 5, 10 sometimes offers on a home. And if you're not pre-approved, I mean, how can the seller know that, have any assurance at all that you can even afford the house? So they're not going to turn away 9 qualified buyers if you don't have a pre-approval letter. So that's the most important. Secondly, choice of lender is really, really important today, because most lenders, quite frankly, are overwhelmed with the number of refinance and purchase applications right now, just because the rates are so low. And so a lender that was good to you a few years ago isn't necessarily going to be able to give you good service today. So I'm only sending, my clients to people that I've, recently gone through a transaction with, that I know that they've expanded their network of loan processors to be able to turn around your application within a reasonable time period. Because what happens is there's such a backlog in underwriting in particular, that sellers get frustrated and they cancel contracts. So
Got it.
you got to be like really, really careful to make sure that that your lender is going to be able to turn your contract around in a reasonable period, say, 30 days. Some are taking 60, and that literally is killing deals.
Well, sure. 30 days is a long time. And I mean, I remember from when my wife and I bought a few years ago, 30 days is a lifetime in real estate, right? So that's, doubling the amount of time you're going to wait certainly could be a deal. Makes sense. It would be a deal killer.
Yeah.
Are there just staying with the theme of how hot the market is right now, are there certain types of homes or just areas, regions, kind of neighborhoods, things like that are especially hot or attractive right now?
Yeah, there's because the market's been strong for so long and is really on fire now, a lot of neighborhoods are, kind of neighborhoods in the periphery, neighborhoods that are bordering areas like Logan Square, Albany Park, very, very hot. There's just been a very low level of inventory for many, many years. And so as prices appreciate significantly in these hot areas, again, like Logan Square, people are looking to the neighboring communities for opportunities to get in the market. So anything anywhere close to the downtown core, pretty much within about 5 miles in any direction from the downtown core, is hot.
I mean, that makes sense. I feel like even in the 10 years I've lived in the city, the neighborhoods that have been hot or expensive have kind of started expanding over time. When I moved to the city, I remember Wicker Park was sort of the joke, at least in school anyway, was that, oh, it's kind of a cheap hipster area you can live. And now that's not,
Oh, yeah.
It's only been 10 years. I mean, I know 10 years to some seems like a lot, but it's really not. And in 10 years, it's gone from that right to, it's hyper expensive. And now it's like, okay, Logan is the cheaper of the two options, but not even that cheap anymore.
For sure. No, and Logan's expensive. But to your point, when I moved here from Toronto 14 years ago, I was absolutely shocked at how much empty space and lots there were. Toronto's housing market has been I think it's the number one year-over-year growth in the world for 12 years straight.
Oh, wow.
I haven't seen soil anywhere in that city for decades, right? And I came here and there was, lots in River North and Old Town that were vacant. I was shocked. And sure enough, fast forward 14 years, you can't find an inch of soil anywhere.
Another one I feel like is the West Loop, that there, because I went to law school downtown. And so we were in the Loop and there was kind of Greektown and nothing else at the time. And now you go over to Randolph Street and you can't even really navigate. Well, I haven't been down there in a little bit because of COVID, but at least the last time I remember you couldn't really even drive because there were so many construction sites going on. There were so many construction trucks. And that, that was a lot of that stuff earlier, empty office buildings, empty industrial stuff. And now it's one of the most expensive, fast growing parts of the city, I feel like.
Yeah. Once Google entered the Fulton Market area, that was that. That
was the end of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, just generally kind of stepping back a bit and talking about your practice, I think I'm assuming one of the challenges in your field is that there's a lot of people who do it. Everybody's got a friend or a relative or a brother or a whatever, or sister who's doing what you do. So what sets you apart? Why Brad Etlin, I guess, for lack of a better question?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Max. So there's a lot of brokers, to your point. There's a lot of real estate agents and brokers out there. There's a lot of great ones and there's a lot of not so great ones, just like any other field. So, the feedback I get from my clients is that I'm honest, I'm responsive. There's no waiting for me to get back to my clients. People call me at 10 o'clock at night and I'm responsive. I know people have different work schedules and, juggling kids and work and everything else these days. And so I don't waste anybody's time. I'm responsive. I bring knowledge. And probably more important than anything is I'm trustworthy. I never push a client, whether I'm looking for an office space for a small business or helping a new family find their first home. I'm never going to push a client into a situation that's not good for them. Okay, because that's my nature, but also because I want them to come back. I want my clients to be with me and buy a home for me 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And I want them to send me their mom and their sister and their best friend. And because of that, I provide knowledge, I'm reliable, I'm trustworthy, and people come back to me.
I think there's probably no higher compliment, right, than somebody coming back to you again or sending a relative or friend and saying, I trust you, and now I want to trust you with this other person that I care about.
For sure. And that's the nature of the game. I want to give people not only good service, but great service, because I don't want to be chasing new clients all the time, to be honest. I want to have relationships with people for many, many years and help them, and they can help me too.
Well, sure. And the other nice thing about a good realtor, right, is you're going to know good people. So you want to help them be happy in that home. So you're able to, I'm assuming you're able to also make recommendations on contractors, somebody to fix this or that, or make this improvement or that improvement. Here's what I do.
Absolutely. I'm kind of like a one-stop shop. People come to me because they, even if someone needs a refi, they come to me. They know I know the right lenders that are, not gonna, that are gonna move things through quickly and smoothly and not waste their time. I have buyers that do multi-units that need rehab work, and I have a strong network of anywhere from painters to general contractors, carpenters, and electricians, and real estate attorneys. So I have all those people. There's, when you come to me, you don't have to think, because I can, answer all your questions and bring in all the people that you need to, whether you're a new home buyer or moving into a new office space or an investor, I can help bring in all the resources that you need. And of course, I'll only direct you to people that I know and I trust that have done great service for me, provided great service for me in the past, and my clients.
That's great. So just speaking of those clients, if somebody is looking to buy a home or sell their home, they're looking to get involved in this process. How far in advance of their date, let's say I want to move on, well, we're past August 1st. Let's say I want to move on November 1st. I want to be out of this house by November 1st. How far in advance of that date, not that specific date, but any date, do you want people approaching you?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, even if you're not ready to buy, let's talk, because there's a lot of steps that people don't realize, and you wouldn't realize unless you've been through it. There's a lot of things that you need to go through to prepare for. Give you a perfect example. I had a client who had ample cash, great cash reserves, great jobs, but recently moved to the country, or only a few years ago, and didn't have a credit score at all. And so despite having great jobs, great cash, and clearly the ability to afford their home, they couldn't buy. So that's the type of situation where it can take 6 months, sometimes 12 or 18 months to establish a credit score. And there's other situations like that. So I would say, if you think you might be in the market to buy or sell your home 12 months, 18 months from now, that's okay. Let's talk. Let me listen to your needs, understand what your situation is, and let's figure out a plan. And you're not wasting my time. I love talking to people. I never make my clients feel that a question is silly, because no question is silly. Let's talk, let's figure out a plan, and let's walk together down the path to finding you your next home or selling.
That sounds great. So if somebody wants to start on that path with you, how can they reach you, Brad?
Definitely. So you can text or call me anytime, 312-709-3247. Or feel free to visit me online at www.bradetlin.homes. That's BRADETLIN.homes, HOMES. All
right.
Well, great having you today, Max.
Thank you for having me, Brad. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I appreciate the conversation.
My pleasure, and thank you to our audience. Again, this is Brad Etlin. I am a residential and commercial broker with Kale Realty. This is Chicagoans at Home Talk and Shop. And thank you again so much, Max Barrick, for being with us today.
Thanks, Brad.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.